Hello again, children. I'm going to read you this week another story from Horrid Henry's life and mischief that he gets up to. Can you remember Horrid Henry? He was a nasty little boy, wasn't he? And he was always upsetting his goody-goody little brother, Peter. He hasn't changed. He's still naughty and still making Peter's life miserable. This one is Horrid Henry's revenge. Slap! Ah! Slap! Slap! Pinch, pinch, pinch. Mom! Shrieked Peter. Henry slapped me. Did not then? Did too, and he pinched me. Henry, stop being horrid, said Mum. But Peter started it, shouted Henry. Did not, wailed Peter. Henry did. Horrid Henry glared at perfect Peter. Then he sighed. The truth was, he was stuck with Peter. But if he couldn't sell Peter and he couldn't turn Peter into a worm, he could get Peter into trouble. Unfortunately, getting perfect Peter into trouble was easier said than done. Peter never did anything wrong. Also, for some reason, he didn't always trust Henry. The only way to get Peter into trouble was by tricking him. And if it took all year, Horrid Henry vowed he would come up with a perfect plan. A plan to get Peter into trouble. Big, big, big trouble. That would be almost as good as turning him into a worm. I'll pay you back, Peter, growled Henry, thumping his teddy, Mr. Kill, against the bedpost. I will be revenged on you. What are you doing, Henry? Asked Peter. Nothing, said Horrid Henry. Quickly he stopped poking around the old apple tree at the end of the garden and stood up. You're doing something, I know you are, said Peter. Whatever I'm doing is none of your business, Telltale, said Henry. Have you found something? Said Peter. He looked at the base of the tree. I can't see anything. Maybe, said Henry, but I'm not telling you. You can't keep a secret. Yes, I can, said Peter. And you're too young, said Henry. No, I'm not, said Peter. I'm a big boy. Mum said so. Well, too bad, said Horrid Henry. Now go away and leave me alone. I'm doing something important. Perfect Peter slunk off. Well, about 10 paces, then turned and stood still, watching Henry. Horrid Henry continued to prowl around the tree, staring intently at the grass. Then he whistled, unlike me, because I can't whistle, and dropped to his knees. What have you found? Said Perfect Peter eagerly. Treasure? Much better than treasure, said Horrid Henry, and he picked something up and hid it in his hand. Oh, show me, said Peter. Please? Come on, please. Horrid Henry considered. If, and I mean if, I tell you something, do you swear by the sacred oath of the purple hand to say nothing about it to anyone? I swear, said Peter. Even if you're being tortured by aliens? I won't tell, shrieked Peter. Horrid Henry put his finger to his lips, then tiptoed away from the tree to his fort. Peter followed. I don't want them to know I'm telling you, he whispered when they were hidden behind the branches. Otherwise they'll disappear. Who? Whispered Peter. The fairies, said Henry. Fairies? Squeaked Perfect Peter. You mean you've seen? Shh! Hissed Horrid Henry. They'll run away if you tell anyone. I won't, said Perfect Peter. Promise? Oh, wow, fairies in our garden. Oh, Henry, fairies. Just wait till I tell my teacher. No! Screamed Horrid Henry. Tell no one, especially grown-ups. Fairies hate grown-ups. Grown-ups stink to fairies. Perfect Peter clasped his hand over his mouth. Sorry, Henry, he said. Horrid Henry opened his hand. It was sprinkled with gold glitter. Fairy dust, said Horrid Henry. It looks just like glitter, said Perfect Peter. Of course it looks like glitter, said Horrid Henry. Where do you think glitter comes from? Wow, said Peter. I never knew glitter came from fairies. Well, now you do, said Henry. Can I see them? Asked Peter. Please, let me see them. They only come out to dance at dead of night, said Horrid Henry. Past my bedtime, said Perfect Peter. Of course, said Horrid Henry. Midnight is the fairy hour. Oh, said Peter, and his face fell. I told you were too young, said Henry. Wait, said Perfect Peter. If they only come out at midnight, how come you've seen them? Because I've sneaked out and hidden up the apple tree, said Horrid Henry. It's the only way. Ah, said Perfect Peter. Said Perfect Peter. Ooh, said Perfect Peter. I'm going to see them tonight, said Henry casually. Do you think you could ask them to come before 7:30? Asked Peter. Oh, yeah, right, said Henry. Hiya, fairies. My brother wants you to dance for him at 7 o'clock. Yeah, sure thing, said Henry. You don't speak to fairies. You have to hide up the tree. If they knew I'd seen them, they'd run away and never come back. Perfect Peter was in torment. He so wanted to see the fairies more than anything in the world. But getting out of bed after lights out and sneaking outside and climbing the tree and on a school night? It was too much. I can't do whispered Perfect Peter. Henry shrugged. Fine, baby. You need your rest. Peter hated being called baby. Next to Smelly Nappy, it was the worst name Henry could call him. I am not a baby. Yes, you are, said Henry. Now go away, baby. Just don't blame me when you spend the rest of your life moaning that you missed seeing real live fairies. And Henry started to leave the fort. Perfect Peter sat very still. Fairies! But was he brave enough and bad enough to sneak out of the house at night? Don't do it, whispered his guardian angel. Do it, squeaked his devil. A very small, sad, puny little creature who spent his life inside Peter's head, squashed flat by the guardian angel. I'll come, said Perfect Peter. Yes, thought Horrid Henry. Okay, said Henry. Tiptoe, 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 tiptoe. Horrid Henry sneaked down the stairs, and Perfect Peter followed him. Softly, Henry opened the back door and slipped outside. He held a small torch. It's so dark, said Perfect Peter, staring into the shadows at the bottom of the garden. Quiet, whispered Horrid Henry. Follow me. They crept across the lawn down to the apple tree. Perfect Peter looked up into the ghostly branches. That's too high for me to climb, he protested. No, it isn't. I'll give you a leg up, said Horrid Henry. He grabbed Peter and shoved him up. Peter caught the lowest branch and started to climb. Higher, said Henry. Go as high as you can. Peter climbed and climbed and climbed. This is high enough, squeaked Perfect Peter, and he settled himself on a branch and then cautiously looked down. I don't see anything, he whispered. There was no reply. Henry, said Peter. Henry, said Peter a little louder. Still there was no reply. Perfect Peter peered into the darkness. Where could his brother be? Could Henry have been kidnapped by fairies? Oh, no. Then Perfect Peter saw a dreadful sight. There was his brother running back into the house. And there's a drawing of Perfect Henry underneath his brother, having pushed him up to the first branch of the tree so he could climb the rest of the way himself. He is really horrid, Henry, isn't he? Perfect Peter didn't understand. Why wasn't Henry waiting to see the fairies? Why had he left Peter? And then, suddenly, Peter realised the terrible truth. His treacherous brother had tricked him again. "I'll get you! You're gonna be in big trouble! I'll... Then he stopped. His legs were too short to reach the lower branch. Perfect Peter couldn't climb down. He was stuck up a tree, all alone, at night. Well, he had three choices. He could wait and hope that Henry would come back and help him. Fat chance. Or he could sleep all night in the damp, cold, scary, spooky tree. Or he could... "Mom!" screamed Peter. "Dad!" Mum and Dad stumbled out into the darkness. They were furious. "What are you doing out here, Peter?" screamed Mum. "You horrible little boy!" screamed Dad. "It was Henry's fault!" shrieked Peter as Dad helped him down. "He brought me here and made me climb up." "Henry is sound asleep in bed," said Mum. "We checked on him on the way out." "I am so disappointed in you, Peter," said Dad. "No stamp collecting now for a month." "Ah!" wailed Peter. "Shut up!" screamed the neighbours. "We're trying to sleep." Meanwhile, back in bed, Horrid Henry stretched and smiled. No one could pretend to be asleep better than Horrid Henry could. What a perfect revenge, he thought. Peter in trouble, Henry in the clear. He was so excited, he never noticed his torn, dirty, leafy pyjamas. Unfortunately, the next morning, his mother did. I like that. Horrid Henry going to get into trouble for being nasty to his brother yet again. Hope you enjoyed that one, children. I did. I enjoyed reading it to you anyway. Okay, I shall see you again next week. Hope you have a good time in between. 7 days to enjoy yourselves and to enjoy school too. See you then. Bye.